Hello, it's Thursday afternoon, March 19th, and I thought I'd just have a cup of tea with any of you that are live out there um, and have some time to just come into a conversation with me. Tonight at 8:50-ish, I think it's 8:50 in the Pacific Northwest, Pacific time, we have the turn to the Spring Equinox. And this is a beautiful moment, and I just want to acknowledge it and the energy of it and invite you all into the energy that is actually ripening here on the equinox. In the work that I do, and some of you may have read my book, The Way of the Mysterial Woman, I work with the core Persephone-Demeter myth. It's an ancient Greek myth. And when I first heard it many years ago, it was probably 15 years ago, it struck me powerfully that this myth was actually speaking so clearly to these times. And I'll just tell you what it is, briefly, the myth in short form. And the myth itself is wrapped around the equinoxes and the solstices. So it's significant to this time today as we turn into the spring equinox. So the basic myth is Kore, as her maiden name was, which is the word maiden in Greek, was picking flowers with her mother and her other sisters innocently in a field when Hades, who was the god of the underworld, roared up in his chariot, and he made an arrangement with Zeus to have Kore as his bride, and he grabbed her and took her into the underworld. And there are many things that happened in that time, and what happened to Demeter and so on, which you can read more about in the myth or in my book where I have the myth. But the key thing here is that she went into the underworld for a period of time, and she resisted everything that was happening there and refused to eat anything, refused to talk to anybody, refused to engage at all with this capture. And ultimately, because the earth began to stop growing its crops and there were no longer any offerings to be made to Zeus, he relented and sent Hermes down to rescue Kore from the underworld and bring her back to the upper world, to her mother Demeter. So he comes down and gets her, and just as they're leaving, getting ready to leave the underworld, Hades offers Kore some pomegranate seeds, and she thinks she's about to leave the underworld and is quite happy to finally eat something. So she takes these seeds, eats them, returns to the upper world, and then finds out very quickly that having eaten the fruits of the underworld, she will be required to spend 6 months in the underworld and 6 months in the upper world. And this is this moment today when the turn happens for Kore, where she actually returns back to the upper world. Ultimately, over time, she actually ends up falling in love with Hades, becoming queen of the underworld and queen of the upper world. All right, so that's the myth. Why does that matter today? And here's the essence of the message I just want to extend to any of you listening today. She actually learns to see in the dark. She learns to be in the dark, not as this terrible thing she's running away from all the time and resisting, but as actually a natural part of life. The feelings, the sensations in the body, the humanity, we could say, of what it is to be here in a body on Earth. And she becomes queen of the upper world because, and now I would say even empowered by the depth of her underworld experience. So when she's queen of the upper world, she carries the wisdom from the underworld. And when she's in the underworld, she carries the memory of the light and how this time in the dark can actually seed her time in the light. So I know these are dark times for many of us. And in my own life, I would say, like all of you, we're nothing is the same anymore. It's really different than it was even yesterday, or certainly last week or the week before. And we can use this energy of the equinox to actually mark that difference, to be able to say, all right, that I bow down to the cycle that I've been in, and I embrace where I am right now. And one of the things that I think is always asked at the equinox is, what are the habitual patterns we need to leave behind? That's what is left in the dark. And as spring comes here in the Northern Hemisphere, what are the seeds of our time in the dark that we can take into the upper world that might bear fruit? So that's what I want you to think about, and just maybe even consider doing a ritual on the time of the equinox. It's a very powerful way to communicate with the underworld. And hello, Clara. Lovely to have you online with me. And yes, bowing down. There's a kind of bowing down. I think there's something in the deep feminine that is often symbolized, right, as the dark. Then the yin-yang symbol, it's the dark that is half of the yin-yang symbol, the deep feminine. And we know that there's a dot of yang in the yin, and there's a dot of yin in the yang. Both are needed. We have highly undervalued the yin, and that yin ability to be with what is. And so, one of the key things I want to extend and sort of stream here to you now, and for those of you who watch later, is to not resist what's actually happening, to not suffer the suffering. There is a lot of suffering right now, some really fighting for their lives in critical care units, some with family members who are there, the isolation of many, the difficulty in just every way, and we all have our front line of what that is for us. So the first piece is somehow to accept that it's hard, and that I'm human, and there is some suffering right now. That's all right. In every rite of passage in any of the traditional cultures, when we're going from one phase to the next, there is always a sacrifice. There's always something that has to be given up. And this, I think, as you're saying, Clara, too, is the bowing down. So kind of bowing down. What am I willing to give up right now? What old habit is no longer serving me, those I love, and the world at large? So I invite you into the possibility of even a simple ritual tonight, where you maybe write down on a piece of paper, what is it that you're willing to let go of now? What fear, what thought form, what behavior, what pattern that you've been holding on to that just doesn't serve now? And then the turn here is when she comes up to the upper world, she comes to bring those seeds into spring. And I noticed early this morning when I went out for a walk, just as the sun was coming up, first of all, the very few planes, so I'm hearing birds I don't always hear. And I noticed the buds starting to come out on the branches. So in what way can you turn your consciousness toward what's emerging with gratitude? Just a little bit of light that's coming. Lovely to hear you also, Clara. Thank you for your comment. And yes, you go to sleep in Berlin, and I send you my love. Really glad to have this time to tune into you. So let me close now here. Just wanted to bring my equinox voice into the conversation today. And I want to leave you with this poem by Rumi that I think just speaks beautifully to this way in which life is all about contraction and expansion, that there are dark times and there are light times, that actually we're here to hold it all. The hypermasculine just wants the expansion, the bigger, better, greater, light, me, mine. And the opportunity here is to hold, like the heart, what expands and what contracts. This is called Loss by Rumi. Your grief for what you've lost lifts a mirror up to where you're bravely working. The grief for what you've lost lifts a mirror up to where you're bravely working. Expecting the worst, you look, and instead, here's the joyful face you've been wanting to see. Your hand opens and closes and opens and closes. If it were always a fist or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding, the two as beautifully balanced and coordinated as bird wings. Your grief for what you've lost lifts a mirror up to where you're bravely working. Expecting the worst, you look, and instead, here's the joyful face you've been wanting to see. Your hand opens and closes and opens and closes. If it were always a fist or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding, the two as beautifully balanced and coordinated as bird wings. Thank you, Rumi. So on this equinox, I send you my love. I also extend an invitation for you to come into circle with me and many other women. On Wednesdays, I'm running an open sanctuary circle. You can find out more about that. I'll put a post down below after this video. For about 45 minutes, we come into circle, we ground into presence, we ride, be with what is in our own very immediate lives, and then we're energizing a collective intention together. So I'll send you that, and you can join us. All right. Stay in the present, stay healthy, stay open. Open to the great mystery as she unfolds during these pivotal times. Sending my love.